A shadow moves beneath the surface of this mystery, and every clue pushes our detective deeper into danger. Settle in, because nothing tonight is as simple as it seems. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the murder intended for the Great Wolf. The first hint that the night intended mischief came from the radiator, which gave a long, rattling groan, like it had finally decided to confess its sins. I was still at my desk at 12:47, finishing a memo that Wolfe would read, frown at, and dismiss before breakfast. I've learned not to take it personally. Wolfe dismisses the sunrise every morning, and that's the most innocent thing in New York. At exactly 12:52, something whispered across the hall floorboards. When you've spent enough years in Wolfe's brownstone, you get an ear for the place. Fritz's light tread is a polite gliding. Theodore's shuffle comes with irritated muttering about humidity. Wolfe's footsteps sound like someone rolling a reluctant boulder down velvet. This sound was none of them. It was soft, furtive, and desperate to avoid being noticed. By the time I reached the hall, all I caught was the tail end of movement outside, a shadow that folded into the Manhattan dark like it had been born of it. The street was empty except for wind twisting old newspaper clippings into nervous little dances. The only thing on the floor was a thin envelope, nudged under our door like a scared rat looking for cover. I picked it up. No name, no stamp, no watermark. The envelope was expensive, smooth, stiff, the kind of stationery publishing houses and literary salons buy in bulk to make themselves feel exclusive. A red herring thought flickered. Maybe some wealthy writer had mistaken us for their editor and wanted to complain about commas. I've received stranger mail. Inside was a single sheet with one typed line. The man they want to kill is not you, Goodwin. It's the Great Wolf. The ink wasn't uniform. Wolf was a shade darker, like someone swapped ribbons mid-threat. Cute. My pulse took the elevator from ground floor to penthouse in 3 seconds. It wasn't fear. I've been threatened by the best. But threatening Wolf was another matter. The man may be infuriating, immovable and allergic to fresh air, but he's also Nero Wolfe, my boss, my daily tormentor, and the only genius I'd trust in a dark alley where the shadows have knives. I headed upstairs. Wolfe does not enjoy being awakened outside emergencies such as earthquakes or the collapse of civilization. Unfortunately for his sleep schedule, a warning of murder qualifies. I knocked once. Wolfe's voice drifted out, thick, dignified, and disgruntled. Archie, this is insupportable. It will be more insupportable if someone makes good on this death threat, I said, stepping in. He sat upright in bed, wrapped in a brown silk robe that looked like it cost more than my first year's salary. His hair was slightly mussed, a condition he considers bodily indecency. Death threat. His eyebrows rose a millimeter, which in wolf speak is a scream. I handed him the note. He studied it once, twice, then pretended he'd been born bored. Folderol. But his fingers tightened on the paper. You missed the dark flourish at the end, I said. They thought it worth mentioning that I'm not the target this time. That, he muttered, is small consolation. He glared as if I'd arranged the whole thing for dramatic effect. I resent that, I said. If I wanted drama, I'd have opened the door holding a candelabrum. And dripped wax on my carpet. Pfui. He got out of bed, no small visual event, and shuffled toward his chair. Even half asleep, Wolfe moved with the self-importance of a dictator surveying conquered land. Who delivered this? He demanded. A ghost with good footwork. They slid it under the door and vanished before I could say hello. A pity. Your greetings are usually so charming. Your gratitude overwhelms me. We traded glares. That's our version of affection. He studied the paper again. This time he frowned, deep and troubled. I've seen wolves in zoos display more emotional transparency, but Wolfe has tells if you know where to look. Tiny shifts in the jaw, in the shoulders, in the pace of his breathing. He was rattled, and that put a cold knife in my gut. Notice the ink, I said. The word wolf looks like it came from a different ribbon. A trivial detail, he replied automatically, but he looked at it again. Before I could press him, the doorbell rang. At 1:08 a.m., that bell means one of 3 things: Kramer, corpse, or catastrophe. I wasn't in the mood for numbers 2 or 3, and Kramer was hardly a comfort. I went down. Pearly Stebbins stood on the stoop, blocky and bulldog-tired, with a patrolman behind him who looked 2 yawns from collapse. "Goodwin," Stebbins grunted. "Kramer wants you." "Tell him he needs to take a number like everyone else," I said. "He's already here." Lovely. Kramer was waiting in the front room, coat collar up, cigar unlit but gripped like he intended to strangle it. His expression wasn't angry, just wary, strained, a man who'd spent too many nights being proven correct about the worst of humanity. "Where's Wolfe?" he asked. "Not in Atlantic City. What's up?" He held out his own envelope, same stock, same absence of markings. Inside was a message typed on the same machine. "Be prepared. The giant will fall. You cannot stop the story." "The giant," I murmured. "They really should form a publishing company. They've got a flair for titles." Kramer didn't smile. "This came to me through one of my men. A patrolman found it stuck in the precinct entrance door half an hour ago. Whoever's playing games is doing it city-wide." He studied my face. I didn't like the concern in his eyes. "Goodwin, this isn't a crank, and it's not about you." I noticed. "Someone's after Wolfe, the note's clear." "And you came running," I said lightly. "I'm touched." "Don't be." He jabbed the cigar at me. "If someone kills that big brain of his, I'll spend the next 10 years writing paperwork explaining why we didn't prevent it." Affection, in Kramer speak. I led him upstairs to Wolfe, who had settled into his office chair like a sultan prepared to judge the unworthy. Seeing Kramer, he sighed. "Inspector, your visits arrive at the most inconvenient hours." "This one's not social," Kramer growled. "You're in danger." Wolfe lifted a finger. "Archie, beer." "It's not afternoon." "Phooey, then coffee. Strong." I made it. Orchid hours were over. Caffeine was fair game. Kramer handed Wolfe the second note. Wolfe read it, then exhaled slowly. That sound was practically an aria of alarm. "There is," Wolfe said, "an intellect behind this, and pretension, a dangerous combination." "That's what I feared," Kramer muttered. Wolfe gestured to a chair. "Sit, Inspector." Normally Kramer refuses. This time he sat. Wolfe continued. "You believe these messages relate to my next case?" "Yeah. Trouble is, you don't have a next case, at least not one we know about." "Incorrect," Wolfe murmured. "Cases often arrive before clients." "That's a red herring if I ever heard one," I said. "We haven't had a client since noon." Wolfe glowered at me for using fish metaphors in serious discussion. Kramer leaned forward. "Wolfe, threats are one thing, but we have 2 notes on high-end stationery used by Manhattan's publishing clubs and writer circles. Someone with money or connections, someone who knows you." "I know many people," Wolfe said grimly. "Too many. And some want him dead," I offered helpfully. "Archie," Wolfe warned, but he didn't deny it. Kramer rubbed his face. "Look, I'm not here to trade insults. A maniac is advertising his murder schedule, and the final act is Wolfe. My men are taking this seriously." He paused, then added something rare. "And I'm asking you, both of you, not to ignore this." That landed like a lead typewriter. Wolfe straightened. "I do not intend to be murdered, Inspector." "Good, because if you die on my watch, the Commissioner will personally fold me into an envelope like the one you just read." Archie Goodwin, community pillar that I am, resisted the urge to laugh. We spent the next 15 minutes reviewing the clues. 2 notes, mismatched ink, special paper, anonymous delivery, literary motifs. Wolfe declined to share conclusions, which told me he had some. Finally, at 1:46, Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz materialized in the doorway, eyes alert despite the hour. "Fritz," Wolfe said, "there will be no interruptions tonight. Lock the kitchen door. If anyone knocks, do not respond." "Yes, sir," Kramer stood. "All right, Wolfe. I'll post 2 men outside, and Goodwin, don't go chasing shadows." "No promises," he grunted. "Figures." At the door he paused. "Wolfe, stay alive." Wolfe gave a curt nod. Respectful silence. That was their version of a hug. When the house quieted, Wolfe finally looked at me. "Archie." "Yes?" "You will not leave the house until I instruct otherwise," I grinned. "You worrying about me?" He scowled. "I am safeguarding my investment." "Of course, purely financial." "Go to bed," he ordered. I headed toward the hall. Fine, but remember, you're the only man in Manhattan whose murder requires a typed RSVP. He growled something in French. I took that as a lullaby. If you ever want proof that morning sunlight has a sense of humour, try watching it pour cheerfully across Nero Wolfe's office at 9 o'clock, right when he's exiled to the plant rooms, and I'm left guarding the fort on caffeine and stubbornness. The orchids upstairs get pampered like royalty, while the rest of us peasants make do with whatever Fritz calls breakfast. I'd just finished my second cup of coffee and was arranging the morning mail into the piles Wolfe prefers, bills he'll ignore, manuscripts he'll reject, and invitations he'll despise, when the doorbell rang at 9:27. A client before lunch is almost always bad news, and the ring had that brittle, slightly hysterical tone that tells you someone is gripping the button like it's life support. I opened the door and met Miss Leona Hale. If anxiety ever needed a spokesperson, she could have been it. Trim, sharp-featured, mid-30s, professionally tailored but showing seams of exhaustion. Her gloves trembled. Her pupils kept darting to the neighbours' windows, as though a sniper might be balancing a rifle on Mrs. Irwin's flower pots. "Mr. Goodwin?" she asked, voice strained and too soft for the hour. I must speak with Mr. Wolfe." "Congratulations," I said politely. "You're the day's first optimist." She blinked like she'd forgotten how conversations worked. "It's urgent, truly urgent, please." She wasn't lying, not intentionally anyway. Wolfe hates being consulted before orchid hours end. But there are rules and then there are alarms, and Miss Hale was one shrill bell shy of a meltdown. I escorted her inside, letting the door shut behind us like a judge closing a case file. The office was immaculate except for my papers, and one dying geranium Wolfe lets me keep out of pity or morbid curiosity. Miss Hale perched on the edge of the red chair like she feared the upholstery might explode beneath her. I took my seat at my desk. "Mr. Wolfe will be available at 11, I told her, "or sooner if your problem involves blood, fire, or financial ruin directed at him personally." Her fingernails dug into her gloves. "Mr. Goodwin, someone is going to be killed." That got my attention, though a lot of people in Manhattan make similar predictions, and most of them are wrong until they're right. "Who, exactly?" I asked. She swallowed, hard. "Someone of renown." "That narrows it down from 8 million to maybe 1 million, I said. "Care to tighten the list?" "I must speak with Mr. Wolfe." Timing is everything. At 9:58 the elevator hummed, Wolfe descending from orchid paradise to the mortal realm. He emerged moments later, massive and composed, silk handkerchief in pocket, expression set to its default, "I already regret this meeting" position. He glided into his chair with a sigh that suggested the chair was still insufficiently grateful. "Madam," he said, "you have intruded upon my morning before I have completed my first beer. This had better be of substance." It is." She stood, then sat again. "Mr. Wolfe, I am Leona Hale, editor at the Aurora Literary Circle." Wolfe's eyebrows acknowledged this with a minimal rise. Aurora was a name he knew, an exclusive circle of writers, editors, and critics who blended self-importance with martinis and considered both sacred texts. "What do you want?" he asked. Her lips trembled. It's hard to explain. A crime hasn't actually, occurred. Not yet, but I fear it will." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Madam, you expect me to preside over hypotheticals. I do not predict murders. I solve them." She panicked. "Please, Mr. Wolfe, hear me. There was a vote at Aurora last week, an expulsion." "Expulsions from literary societies," Wolfe said, "are as common as typographical errors." "This one wasn't," her voice cracked. "Dorian Knepp, a brilliant, volatile writer. They expelled him for conduct unbecoming a gentleman." She clenched her gloves harder. "He swore someone of renown would die for their arrogance." Wolfe snorted softly. "Writers, always indulging melodrama." "This was not a threat for print," she insisted. "He meant it." Wolfe shifted, which for him is the equivalent of a gasp from normal people. "Meaning?" Miss Hale inhaled shakily. "He has been sending letters, coded letters, to everyone who voted for his expulsion. Threats, mad ramblings. He said the first death would awaken the circle." She opened her handbag with trembling fingers and produced a stack of photostats, no originals, which kept us nicely within canon law. I took them, fanned them out. Typed passages, clipped phrases, symbols that looked like a typist had sneezed mid-sentence, literary metaphors twisted into accusations. Wolfe extended a hand. I passed him the stack. He scrutinized the pages with a slow precision that could peel paint from walls. "These are amateurish," he declared, "possibly the work of a fevered but not unintelligent mind." Miss Hale rubbed her wrists. "Mr. Wolfe, Dorian Knepp is dangerous. He's brilliant when sober and unhinged when not. And when he was expelled, he screamed that he would write his masterpiece in blood." "That's a trifle gaudy," I said, "even for the avant-garde." She shot me a desperate look. "You must help. We fear he'll make good on it. Someone will die." "And yet," Wolfe said, tone turning arctic, "you come before the crime. You wish me to intervene preemptively. Why?" She hesitated, a subtle but telling pause. "Because," she whispered, "I think the intended victim is someone prominent, someone outside the circle, someone the others fear that Knepp hates more than any of us." Wolfe stared at her. "Name them." She froze, then shook her head violently. "I shouldn't say, not until I secure your services." Wolfe pressed his fingertips together in a temple of disapproval. "Madam, you come with suppositions rather than facts. You refuse to divulge essentials. I am not a clairvoyant, nor do I work on whim." She broke. "He'll kill someone. Don't you understand? Wolfe raised a palm. It stopped her cold. "Provide the originals of these threat letters and the full context of the vote that expelled him." I can't," she whispered. "The originals must remain with the circle. But I brought photostats, and I swear everything depends on your involvement." "That," Wolfe replied, "is insufficient." She flinched like he'd slapped her. "Then you refuse?" Before he could answer, the phone rang. I lifted the receiver. "Goodwin here." Lon Cohen's voice came through in a state between panic and profanity. "Archie, tell Wolfe he's just been named in a bomb threat. The Gazette got a call 5 minutes ago. Some lunatic referencing the great wolf devoured by fire. We're not running it yet, but the cops are on alert." My stomach turned cold. "Thanks, Lon." I hung up and looked at Wolfe. "Incoming," I said. He grunted. "Inspector Kramer?" "Not yet, but he'll be here soon enough." Miss Hale stared at us. "Bomb threat?" "Yes," I said. "Congratulations. You've upgraded your urgency by a factor of 3. Wolfe glared at me, the way a father glares at the child he refuses to admit he likes. "Archie, sit." I sat. He addressed Miss Hale again. "I require clarity. You fear this Dorian Knepp intends murder?" "Yes." "And you believe the target is someone of renown?" "Yes." "And you suspect I might deduce the identity?" She swallowed. "Yes." "Pfui." Wolfe leaned back. "Your reticence is intolerable. Provide me with the name or I will dismiss you." Her hands shook violently, but the words came out. "I think he means to kill a critic, a famous one, someone responsible for a review that humiliated him." "That," I said dryly, "is every critic in Manhattan." "I mean one in particular," she whispered, "but I cannot say more." Wolfe's nostrils flared, a rare, visible irritation. "Madam, if you wish me to accept a retainer, you must cease this evasiveness." Before she could respond, the phone rang again. This time it was Kramer. His voice was clipped. "Goodwin, is Wolfe there?" "Yes." Tell him this isn't a joke. The Gazette got a bomb threat referencing him. We're dispatching units." "Already heard." "Well, hear this too," Kramer snapped. "If Wolfe has a case brewing, I want to know. I won't have him blindsided by a maniac, or vice versa." That sounded suspiciously like concern. I relayed the message. Wolfe sighed, a deep, rumbling rumination. "Very well," he said finally. "Madam, leave those photostats. They are adequate for an initial analysis. Archie, record the details." I reached for my notebook. Then Wolfe turned to me. His tone shifted. Quiet, firm, protective. "Archie, you will not approach Dorian Knepp without prior consultation." I almost cracked a grin. "You worried about me?" I am preserving my operative, he said stiffly. Only a fool squanders resources. Miss Hale watched us with trembling hope. So, you'll take the case? Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. I will consider it. Bring the remainder of Knepp's coded letters at 6 o'clock, after orchid hours. She nodded, gathered her coat, and fled like a woman escaping her own thoughts. When the door closed, Wolfe turned to me. Archie? Yes? Fetch my beer. I require fortification. It's before noon. His eyelids twitched. Then bring coffee, and cease your inanities. I went to get it. When I returned, he was still staring at the photostats, dark, brooding. Archie? Yes, sir? This will be troublesome. No doubt, I said. At least the killers this time are polite enough to announce their intentions. Wolfe grunted. I took that as agreement and handed him the coffee. If you've never seen Saul Panzer stir sugar into a cup of diner coffee, you've missed a demonstration of the closest thing Manhattan has to Zen. The little chrome spoon barely made a whisper as he rotated it with the sort of patience you normally see in monks, locksmiths, or men about to share bad news. It was 12:14 p.m. I had a ginger ale sweating on the counter, and Saul was giving me that quiet, thoughtful stare that means the world's about to get inconvenient. Knepp, he said finally, keeps 3 haunts, none of them what you'd call picturesque. With Knepp's reputation, I replied, I expected maybe a penthouse stacked with empty whiskey bottles and unmailed rejection letters. Saul cracked a smile, which on him is practically vaudeville. Try a boarding house off 9th, dingy. Smells like cabbage that's lost hope. He's late on rent, the landlord hates him, and the wallpaper wants to resign. Cosy, I said. And his second haunt? Typewriter repair shop, Saul answered. He freelances there, fixing old underwoods, cleaning ribbons, replacing keys for people who still believe prose should sound like metal striking metal. I made a note on Wolfe's preferred yellow pad. So he's brilliant, broke, and inhaling typewriter fumes. That explains the cryptic letters. That's not all, Saul continued. He owes Aurora Literary Circle money, unpaid dues. Apparently he thinks genius exempts him from bookkeeping. Most geniuses think that, I said. Wolfe only escapes because I do the bookkeeping. Saul snorted softly. Third haunt is an alley behind a newsstand on 43rd. He goes there after dark, scribbles notes on envelopes, muttering, watching people like they're characters he's planning to kill off. Lovely, I said. Our kind of client, minus the client part. Saul gave the coffee one last stir. Be careful, Archie. He's not stable. He's paranoid. And he's scared. That last part snagged my attention. Scared of who? Anyone, Saul said. Everyone. Hard to tell. But he jumps at shadows. In Manhattan, I replied, jumping at shadows is good exercise. Saul slid a folded newspaper clipping my way, an unsigned review of Knepp's last book. Blistering, vindictive, the kind of critique that makes a writer either improve or start writing ransom notes. Critic never signed his name, Saul said, but Knepp's been carrying this around for months, like a religious text. Great, I muttered, folding the clipping. A writer with a grudge and too much free time. Saul raised an eyebrow. Wolfe knows what he's dealing with. He has theories, I said. He's allergic to not having theories. Saul's flat cap dipped in a nod. Watch your back. Always. By mid-morning, Wolfe had stopped repeating that order, and I wasn't going to remind him. I found Knepp at dusk, right where Saul predicted, lurking near the typewriter shop like a man debating whether to break in or break down. Neon signs buzzed overhead. Pavement glistened with a thin sheen of rain that hadn't committed to being a storm. Streetcars screeched their mechanical protest as they rounded corners. It was the kind of noir setting directors drool over. Knepp hunched against the brick wall, scribbling furiously on the back of an envelope. His coat was 2 sizes too big and 3 levels past respectability. His hair looked like he'd combed it with a live wire. Every few seconds he muttered, as though arguing with himself, or with the audience in his mind. His eyes flicked everywhere. Doorways, windows, puddles, clouds, the moon if it dared. The only thing he didn't look at was me, which meant he wasn't as paranoid as advertised. Yet. I approached slow, easy, casual. If I'd whistled a jaunty tune, I'd have spoiled the effect. Dorian Knepp, I said lightly, as though I were selling magazine subscriptions and not tracking a potential murderer. His head snapped up. His pupils tightened like camera shutters. The envelope fluttered in his hands. Who are you?" His voice had the quiver of a violin string before it snaps. "Archie Goodwin," I said, aiming for cheerful and hitting mildly irritating. "I scout talent for a couple magazines. Thought you might want to talk shop." A bad choice. Or a great one, depending if you value chaos. Nep jerked backward. No shop, no talk. I don't talk to..." He bolted. He didn't bolt far. He just darted across the sidewalk like a startled pigeon and clipped his shoulder on a mail chute. Something slipped from his fingers, fell against the curb, caught on a puddle, and soaked in the neon's electric glow. He vanished around the corner with a noise halfway between a curse and a terrified sob. I retrieved the fallen scrap. More coded writing. But this one had a phrase that didn't need translation. The giant who devours all. It didn't take genius to know who the giant referred to. If Manhattan had a single man whose appetite was both literal and metaphorical, his name was on our mailbox. Wolfe. "That's not subtle," I muttered. A woman in a red coat passing by raised an eyebrow. I smiled. "Literary criticism," I said. She hurried on. I pocketed the scrap, made my mental notes, and headed for the brownstone. Wolfe had finished Orchid Hours half an hour earlier, which meant I had a narrow window before he barricaded himself behind dinner. I arrived at 6:14. Inside, the brownstone smelled of roast something. Fritz had been inspired. Wolfe was in his chair, brows furrowed, contemplating a crossword puzzle like it had insulted his lineage. "You're late," he announced. "I was chasing writers. They run faster than critics." "Pfui, report." I handed him the scrap. He read it once, then again, then exhaled through his nose with the kind of disdain reserved for incompetence, bad wine, and police paperwork. "This is Knepp's work?" he asked. "Unless someone's forging his delusions." Unsatisfactory. Wolfe tapped the coded passages. "These symbols correspond to simple letter transpositions. Crude, but..." He paused. "The reference is clear enough." "I noticed," I said. "The giant who devours all. You should take it as a compliment. They think you're mythological." Wolfe ignored me. "There is," he said, "a meeting at Aurora tonight. According to this pattern, it is the location of an intended event." I sat. "An ambush?" "A gathering of literary dilettantes," Wolfe corrected. "Which is worse?" "Should I go?" I asked. "No." That was fast. I leaned back. "Afraid I'll be murdered by metaphors?" "Archie," Wolfe glared. "I forbid you to attend a conclave of amateurs with delusions of artistry whose emotional volatility is matched only by their grammatical incompetence." I grinned. "If I'm going to get murdered, I'd prefer it be by someone with proper syntax." Wolfe's mouth twitched. Barely. But for him, it was a laugh riot. Before we could continue the banter, the bell rang at 6:29. I opened the door to reveal Inspector Kramer, trench coat damp from drizzle, cigar in mouth but unlit. Behind him, Pearlie Stebbins smouldered like a disgruntled furnace. Kramer brushed past me. "Wolfe, we checked Knepp's movements." Wolfe folded his hands. "Proceed." "Knepp has an alibi for last night," Kramer said. "We tracked him to a 48-cent a night boarding house from 9 p.m. until well after midnight. Witnesses confirm it. He didn't go near your street." That was a cold slap. "You're sure?" I asked. Kramer grunted. "Stebbins did the legwork himself." Stebbins nodded. Didn't like it, but the bum was there. Talking to himself, scribbling garbage, but there. Wolfe leaned back, expression cool. "That is interesting." "It's irritating," Kramer said. "Everyone wants Knepp to be the kook behind the threats, but he couldn't have delivered those notes." "Then someone wants us to think he did," I said. "That," Kramer admitted grudgingly, "is smart." He pointed at me with the cigar. "Your groundwork put us onto that alley. Good catch." I blinked. A compliment from Kramer is rarer than a quiet day in Manhattan. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow at me, smugly. Kramer continued. "So, if Knepp isn't your bogeyman, who is?" "That," Wolfe replied, "is an answer I do not yet possess. But I will." Kramer exhaled through his nose. "All right, Wolfe. I'll wait for your report," he motioned to Stebbins. They left. No slamming, no cursing, just weary duty. The bell closed with a thud. Wolfe stared at the scrap on his desk. "Archie." "Yes?" "You will not attend Aurora tonight." Fine, I said. But if a bunch of writers start killing each other, don't blame me. He growled something in German and reached for the bell cord. Fritz time. I headed for the door, thinking Knepp was scared. Someone else was cunning. And Wolfe, he was officially on the menu. If there's one hobby I can recommend against, it's attending a gathering of high-strung literary types without body armor. Wolfe had forbidden me to attend Aurora, but he didn't repeat the order, and I wasn't going to remind him. By 7:30 that evening, I was standing outside the Aurora Literary Circle's townhouse on East 62nd, staring up at its gilded transom with the kind of optimism a man feels just before dental surgery. The facade had that polished, old-money smugness, the kind that whispers, "We have mahogany floors, imported rugs, and at least 2 members who pretend to understand French poetry." I rang the bell at 7:31. A tall man with the posture of an offended librarian opened the door. "Your name?" "Archie Goodwin," I said, representing Nero Wolfe. His eyebrows twitched, small but noticeable. "Of course. This way." The foyer smelled like cigar smoke staging a rebellion against lilac perfume. Writers, critics, publishers, everyone had dressed like they were competing for most tortured genius. I took in the mahogany walls, the leather chairs, the towering bookcases, and the strained smiles of people who hated each other but needed each other too much to admit it. I gave Wolfe a quick call from the coat room. He answered on the second ring with a tone suggesting the world had disappointed him again. "You've arrived," he said. "Your psychic powers are improving," I replied. "I'm about to dive into a swamp of egos." "Exercise caution. Writers are volatile." "Coming from a man who'll knife someone over a misplaced comma," he grunted. "Report regularly." I pocketed the phone and went to mingle with the volatile fauna. Inside the main salon, the Aurora members were in fine form. Clive Hackett, the critic, lounged on a velvet couch with the satisfied slouch of a man who'd ruined many a novelist's career and slept well afterward. Verena Lake, poet, dramatic, draped in silk, held a cigarette like it was a dagger. Alden Bryce, playwright, paced with hands behind his back, theatrical even in unoccupied rooms. Geraldine Rusk, the publisher, stood near the refreshments table, wearing an expression that could curdle cream. Miles Tern, best-selling novelist, wore arrogance like a tailored suit. Leona Hale wasn't there yet. The atmosphere was a powder keg of resentment, jealousy, and artisanal snack trays. People argued before the meeting even started about royalties, artistic integrity, critical bias, and whose new manuscript was visionary versus an affront to the English language. The chairman, an elderly man with a beard like neglected moss, banged a gavel. "We will begin." They didn't. Instead, Miles Tern stood up. "Before we waste time on agenda items," he announced, "we need to address the Knepp situation." Groans, eye rolls. A poet nearly fainted from dramatic exhaustion. "Knepp was expelled," Tern said, "and he's clearly unstable. We all received his letters." Bryce snorted. "Cryptic trash. Let him mutter to himself." Geraldine Rusk's voice sliced through the noise. "He threatened us." "And?" Tern shot back. "Do we cower because a disgraced writer throws tantrums?" "That tantrum may become violence," Geraldine insisted. The room vibrated with tension. I found myself standing near a tray of steaming tea, a pleasant Earl Grey if you ignored the possibility of poison. They argued for 10 more minutes. Wolfe was listening through my pocket. Our phone connection stayed open on low volume, and I could almost feel him wincing from afar. Then the door opened. Leona Hale entered, pale and jittery. Her hands shook as she removed her gloves. She spoke in a thin voice. "I apologize. I'm late." Miles Tern smirked. We noticed. She ignored him and crossed to the meeting table where stacks of manuscripts lay like offerings on an altar. Someone handed her a cup of tea. I watched her sip it, her fingers trembling. The chairman resumed talking, but the tension swelled like a wave waiting to break. Leona set her tea down and leaned over a manuscript. She tried to speak. Her mouth formed a word. Then came the scream. Sharp, harsh, instant. Leona's body pitched forward, collapsing across 2 stacks of manuscripts. Papers slid to the floor in a white, papery gasp. I moved first. Years of wolf duty have conditioned my reflexes. By the time Tern and Rusk reached her, I'd already rolled her onto her back. Her lips were blue, her eyes unfocused. Cyanosis. Rapid onset. Poison. The teacup wobbled on the edge of the table for a moment, then tipped, spilling across a speech about literary innovation. The room erupted, shouts, cries, scrambling feet. I raised both hands. "Everyone stand back." This is when you learn how much authority a tall guy with a confident voice actually has. They backed off. I checked her pulse. Nothing. Not even a flicker. Leona Hale was dead, and the literary circle of Manhattan had finally produced a plot twist worth reading. I grabbed the teacup with a handkerchief and set it aside. "Nobody touches anything," I barked. "Especially not the body." Someone whimpered. Someone else accused a rival of murder. Writers are not known for emotional regulation. I pulled out my phone and dialed Wolfe. He answered instantly. "Report," he commanded. "Leona's dead," I said. Silence. A heavy, weighted silence. "How?" Wolfe finally asked. "Tea. Fast-acting poison. I'll know more when Kramer arrives." A beat. Then, unexpectedly, "Archie, you're unhurt?" That caught me. Wolfe asking about my health ahead of his indignation at chaos in his schedule. Unusual enough to put a hitch in my breath. "I'm fine," I said. "Good." His tone hardened again. "Maintain the scene until Inspector Kramer arrives." Wasn't planning on redecorating. I hung up and turned as the door burst open. Pearlie Stebbins, panting and already sweating, charged in. Behind him came Kramer, trench coat fluttering behind him like a disgruntled cape. Kramer surveyed the room with one sweep. His eyes landed on Leona, then on me. What the hell happened? "She drank tea," I said. T disagreed. "For God's—" Kramer stopped himself. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You were here when it happened?" "Front row seat." Stebbins moved toward the body. I blocked him with my arm. "Easy. You stomp any harder and you'll leave footprints on manuscripts. These people are sensitive." Kramer grumbled. "Let Stebbins do his job." "He can do it without flattening half the room." Stebbins shot me a look that could have wilted steel. He eased up, slightly. Kramer crouched over the body, squinting. "Poison?" "Yes," I said. "Fast." He glanced at me, and for the briefest moment, something like understanding crossed his face. "She visited Wolfe earlier." "Correct." "Did she bring this mess to him?" "She didn't get far enough to explain." Kramer stood, jaw tight. No shouting, no threats, just grim calculation. This wasn't a man annoyed at Wolfe. This was a cop who'd seen one body too many this month. While he gathered statements, I scanned the floor. Papers lay everywhere. Among them, partly tucked under Leona's hand, I saw something odd. Thicker paper, rougher texture. I knelt and gently lifted it with my handkerchief. One page, torn abruptly. Title at the top, "The Great Devourer." Unpublished manuscript. Anonymous. Or maybe not. I skimmed the paragraph. It described a mastermind seeking revenge, orchestrating events like a novelist plotting chapters. Murder as literature. Victims chosen like characters meant for climactic drama. Well, that was poetic in the worst way. I folded the page carefully into a second handkerchief, making certain Kramer saw me doing it. "I'm securing this as potential evidence," I told him. "You can log it as soon as we get back to the brownstone." He grunted his approval. Murmurs escalated. Some members insisted Knepp had done it. Others blamed rivals. One woman declared Leona had enemies in the publishing world you could list alphabetically. A perfect red herring field. Kramer finished barking procedural orders. "Goodwin," he said. "Don't leave. I'll need your statement." Thrilled. While the room roiled like a shaken snow globe, I stepped back and took another quick call to Wolfe. "Found a page of a manuscript called The Great Devourer," I said. "Looks like this whole circus might be scripted." Wolfe inhaled sharply. "Bring it. Carefully." "I'll bring myself carefully too." "Archie." "Yeah?" Another beat of softness. "Be thorough. And do not be reckless." "Me?" I said. "Reckless?" His only answer was a dignified, exasperated sigh. As Kramer began sealing off the scene, I took one last look at the chaos. Writers accusing writers. Critics pointing fingers, publishers clutching their pearls. If writers killed with this much dedication on paper, I murmured to myself, the bookstores would run out of space. And with that thought, half amusement, half dread, I stepped toward Kramer to give my report, knowing the night had only just begun. If you ever want to test the structural integrity of Nero Wolfe's office, bring in 5 writers who hate each other and put them under cross-examination. At 10:04 the next morning, I stood behind Wolfe's desk arranging dossiers like I was setting out ammunition. The sunlight filtering through the tall windows landed in neat geometric patches on the Persian rug, little islands of peace about to be trampled by ego, mistrust, and the Aurora Literary Circle's greatest hits collection of grievances. Wolfe was in place, ensconced in his throne of a chair, yellow silk pyjamas exchanged for a brown suit that would have looked stodgy on anyone who didn't weigh a quarter ton. I had a pitcher of water, a stack of notepads, and the patience of a saint impersonator. "Archie," Wolfe said, "is the room prepared?" "As much as it can be," I told him. I hid the sharp objects, the heavy objects, and anything a dramatist might use to make a point. He grunted. "Send the first." I opened the door. "Mr. Miles Turn, you're on stage." Miles Turn strutted in with the confidence of a man who's convinced the universe has been too slow in recognizing his genius. He wore a tailored grey suit with a pocket square that matched the undertone of smugness in his expression. Wolfe gestured to the red chair. "Sit." Turn sat, barely, as if the upholstery had committed a personal offence. I opened his dossier. Miles Turn, bestseller, accused Knepp of plagiarism last year. Publicly. Turn sniffed. Because he did plagiarize. My themes, my structure, my tone. Your ego, I suggested. His eyes flared. "Listen, Goodwin, Knepp was a hack with delusions of—" Wolfe cleared his throat, a sound like a judge objecting telepathically. "Mr. Turn, you were present when Miss Hale died." Turn stiffened. I didn't touch her tea. I was across the room." "Convenient," I said. "Your alibi leaks worse than Fritz's colander, and that thing survived the Depression." Wolfe shot me a glare. "Archie, do not trivialize. Mr. Turn, did Miss Hale confide in you?" "No," Turn exclaimed. Then, after a beat, "She may have hinted that Knepp was planning something, but she didn't trust me." "That," Wolfe murmured, "is clear." Turn bristled but said nothing. I escorted him out. Next up, Verena Lake, the poet whose debts could fill a small epic. She floated into the office at 10:31 wearing lavender silk and sorrow. Her cigarette dangled from 2 fingers like a reluctant suitor. "Ms. Lake," Wolfe said, "your financial situation is dire." She laughed softly, a music box tinkle with razor blades inside. "Everyone knows. You don't have to narrate it, Mr. Wolfe." I flipped open her dossier. You owed Leona Hale money, and Knepp, and Aurora Literary Circle. All true. I owe half of Manhattan, but I don't poison people. It's gauche. "Some people find murder gauche too," I said. Her eyes sharpened. "Goodwin, don't try to rattle me. I've been reviewed by Clive Hackett." Wolfe asked, "Were you ghostwriting Knepp's manuscript?" She froze. "Who told you that?" "A reasonable inference," Wolfe said. Verena lowered her cigarette. "Knepp begged me. He said he needed help, but I never wrote more than a few pages, and certainly nothing worthy of this." She gestured vaguely toward the world's current state of chaos. "Did Ms. Hale know about your arrangement?" I asked. "Yes, and she kept it quiet. She wasn't the enemy." Wolfe narrowed his eyes. "Your debt is not motive enough." "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "if I murdered everyone I owed, I'd need a personal graveyard." Wolfe sighed. Dismissed. When she left, her perfume lingered like a guilty conscience. At 11:03, Clive Hackett stalked in. Long nose, sharp chin, sharper tongue. His kind of critic doesn't review books. He autopsies them. "Mr. Hackett," Wolfe said, "you savaged Knepp's last novel." "He deserved it," Hackett replied. "Self-indulgent drivel." I said, "Funny. You wrote a review once calling someone a genius with the emotional subtlety of a sledgehammer." "That was about Miles Turn," Hackett snapped. I grinned. "Ah, yes. I can barely tell you critics apart. You all have that charming habit of eating your own." Hackett glared. "I had nothing to do with Miss Hale's death." "Where were you when she drank the tea?" Wolfe asked. "Across the room, reading a manuscript that made my eyeballs bleed." "That's not medical," I said. Or alibi, Cal, Hackett growled. If you think I poisoned her, you're a bigger fool than your smug posture implies. Wolfe lifted an eyebrow at me, an order to let Hackett's insults slide. I did, reluctantly. Did Knepp blame you for his expulsion? Wolfe asked. Of course he did. Hack writers always blame critics. It's tedious. Any reason Ms. Hale might fear you? I asked. Hackett smoothed his tie. She feared everyone. Writers are inherently unbalanced. Wolfe grunted. That remark was too general to be useful, but filing away red herrings is part of the job. I ushered Hackett out before he started reviewing the furniture. Geraldine Rusk arrived at 11:37, brisk, polished, spine straight as a printing press. Publishers carry stress the way soldiers carry weapons. Ms. Rusk, Wolfe said, leaning forward slightly, you invested in Knepp's unfinished manuscript. She froze. How did you? Wolfe cut her off. Your interest ledger is not as private as you imagine. Her jaw tightened. I believed in the manuscript. Knepp was inconsistent, but when he was good, he was brilliant. Brilliance can be a motive, I said, especially if you didn't want others profiting. I didn't poison Leona, she snapped. I admired her. Admired her enough to keep secrets? Wolfe asked. Geraldine's gaze flickered. She knew I was funding Knepp. She didn't approve, but she didn't expose me. Did she know about any ghostwriting arrangements? Wolfe continued. Geraldine hesitated. I suspected someone was helping Knepp. He never said who. But you benefited if the book succeeded, I added, and were ruined if it didn't. She bit her lip. That doesn't make me a murderer. Not conclusively, Wolfe agreed. Dismissed. She left in a huff of indignation and Chanel. Alden Bryce, playwright with a temper like nitroglycerin, stormed in at 12:15. He paced immediately, hands slicing the air. This is outrageous, he barked. Interrogations? I'm a respected writer. Sit, Wolfe ordered. Bryce sat, violently. I opened his file. Mr. Bryce, you were heard arguing with Miss Hale yesterday. He huffed. She rejected my latest play, called it overwrought. Was she wrong? I asked. He glared. How dare you? Easily, I said. It's a hobby. Bryce growled. I didn't kill her. She was abrasive, but she had taste. Wolfe leaned forward. Were you ghostwriting Knepp's manuscript? His reaction was something between shock and offence. Absolutely not. Knepp was a pestilent weed choking the garden of American theatre. Poetic, I said. If Homicide ever needs an advertising jingle, you're ready. Bryce scowled. I had nothing to do with poison. Can anyone confirm your whereabouts at the moment Miss Hale drank her tea? Wolfe asked. Bryce hesitated. I was near the refreshments. Close to the tea, I said. Everyone was near the tea. Wolfe waved him away. We are done. Bryce departed, slamming the door with enough force to rattle the filing cabinet. At 12:49, Wolfe signalled for Fritz. It was almost lunch, and he wanted time to think before Kramer arrived. But the doorbell beat Fritz by 11 seconds. Kramer entered with the toxicology report in one hand and a cigar in the other. Rain speckled his coat. His expression was clipped professionalism. Wolfe, he said, we got answers. Proceed, Wolfe instructed. Kramer slapped the folder onto my desk. Poison was a rare imported plant derivative, not your everyday arsenic. This stuff is used in certain paper processing treatments. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Paper processing? Yeah, manufacturers use it on luxury stock. Keeps the texture smooth. I recalled the notes we'd handled, the envelopes, the fancy Aurora stationery. Wolfe's voice took on that quiet, deadly precision. This is significant. Kramer nodded. We traced 3 imports in the last 6 months. 2 go to independent paper crafters. 1 goes directly to the Aurora Circle. Of course it does, I muttered. Wolfe continued. This toxin, what form? Powder soluble in hot liquid, Kramer said. Tea would do nicely. And who had access to the tea? Wolfe asked. Every damn person in that room, Kramer replied. They all took turns round the table. That, Wolfe murmured, is problematic. I added, their alibis aren't airtight. Kramer shot me a look. Don't get smug. Me? I said. Never. Wolfe lifted a hand. Inspector, the ghostwriting, did you learn more? Some members hinted, Kramer admitted. No one's owning it. Yet someone wrote portions of Knepp's manuscript, Wolfe said, and someone had motive to silence Ms. Hale before she spoke to me again. Kramer rubbed his temples. This case is a circus. That, Wolfe replied, is because your performers are talented liars. Kramer sighed, deeply. All right, Wolfe, I'll wait for your next report, but don't try my patience. He left without slamming the door, a rare courtesy. I closed the door behind him. Wolfe glared at the dossiers. Archie, your summary? I gave him the highlights. He frowned. Unsatisfactory. You trivialize essential points. Only the boring ones, he growled. Cease being flippant. Then stop giving me flippable material. We locked eyes. Then Wolfe's scowl softened, fractionally. I rely on your accuracy, he said quietly. That's Wolfe speak for affection. Fritz appeared in the doorway. Lunch is served. Wolfe rose. I said, well, at least the suspect pool can't poison Fritz's food from here. Wolfe muttered, Pfui, come, Archie. And with that ritual flourish, we headed to the dining room, plot thickening faster than Fritz's gravy. The day really started going downhill at 3:42 p.m., which, for a detective agency run by Nero Wolfe, is practically punctual. I was in the office typing up my notes on the Aurora interrogations. Wolfe liked summaries neat, alphabetical, and delivered before dinner, when the phone rang with the particular insistence of a man who has something nasty to report. I picked up. Archie, Saul Panzer said, voice steady but carrying an undertone you could only hear if you'd spent years relying on him. You'd better come downtown. Why? Did you finally kill a typewriter? Saul didn't chuckle. It's Knepp. That froze me. Alive or dead? A pause, then dead, and not by accident. I grabbed my hat, informed Wolfe I was stepping out, and took the Heron down to 47th. The freight elevator behind Briskin Storage and Loans was half blocked by 2 squad cars, a medical examiner's van, and one extremely irritated Pearly Stebbins trying to keep a crowd of rubberneckers from reenacting the Spanish Inquisition. Goodwin, he said, jabbing a thumb toward the elevator. You're gonna love this. Another literary genius bites the dust. Don't spoil the ending, I shot back. He huffed and let me through. Inside the elevator, the scene was grim. Knepp hung slumped in the corner, neck crushed, eyes bulging. Somebody had tied a strip of frayed rope around his throat like a prop suggestion. The effect was theatrical as hell, overdone, staged, self-conscious, a murder with delusions of artistry. Kramer stood just outside the elevator, coat unbuttoned, cigar chewed halfway to mush. Don't say suicide, he said as soon as he saw me. The DA already tried that joke. I wasn't gonna, I told him. Knepp's not the type to kill himself. He'd want reviews. Kramer snorted. Saul found something in his safe deposit box. Saul stepped forward, holding a thick manila envelope with surgical caution. He rented a box at the First Midtown Trust. Signature matches. Inside was a manuscript. Knepp's, I guessed. No, Saul said. It's something else. I took the envelope and pulled out the manuscript. Heavy, dense, typed on expensive stock. The title page read in bold, centered font, The Great Devourer by Dorian Knepp. Only I didn't believe it for a second. I flipped through the pages. Chapter headings leered up at me like accusations. Expulsion, first blood, the circle fractures, the poisoned cup, the giant devours all. My skin prickled. This is Aurora, in manuscript form. Saul nodded. Exactly, Kramer growled. It's a blueprint. Whoever killed Knepp wanted us to think he wrote his own murder plan. I crouched inside the elevator again, studying the angle of the body. The posture was wrong. A writer wouldn't stage his own hanging like a melodramatic stage cue. His hands were too limp, wrists too clean. Someone had staged the scene, badly, like a third-rate playwright trying to impress a real one. Kramer, I said, this isn't Knepp's work. It's a parody of Knepp, and somebody delivered it like a chapter from the world's worst whodunit. He grimaced. That's my read too. He jabbed the air with his cigar. And before you say it, no, Wolfe didn't write this. That was my next thought. Stow it. Saul waited while I finished scanning the last chapter. There's something else, he said quietly. There should be one more chapter. The ending's missing. The The ending where Wolfe dies? I asked. Saul gave one solemn nod. Kramer rubbed his jaw. Great. A killer who writes fan fiction about homicide. Just what this city needs. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was already waiting in the office. Massive, composed, grim. Orchid hours were over, and he had the look of a man prepared to dissect the molecular structure of the universe if the universe refused to behave. Archie, Saul, he said, motioning us to sit. Report. I placed the manuscript on his desk. Nep's dead, throat crushed, staged suicide. Wolfe didn't flinch. Miserable, Saul added, and this was in his safe deposit box. Wolfe held the pages delicately, as though handling a rare medieval codex. His eyes moved slowly across the lines. I waited for a mutter, a grunt, a pfui, or any of his usual reactions. Instead, he grew still, statue still. This, he said at last, is obscene. I raised an eyebrow. Bad prose? Wolfe didn't take the bait. This manuscript is not written by Knepp. It is written by someone imitating him with malicious precision. That tracks, I said. The killer used the plot like a recipe. First expulsion, then coded threats, then Leona, now Knepp. And next, Saul murmured, the giant. Wolfe's lips thinned. Indeed. He flipped through the chapters again until he reached the end. The missing portion is the most important. It would reveal the killer's identity. It should follow logically from these premises. Therefore, someone removed it after Knepp died. Someone with access to the safe deposit box, I asked. No, Wolfe said. That would require identity verification. More likely, someone removed the final chapter before Knepp stored the manuscript, and he stored it because he feared for his life. A silence settled over the room. Even the radiator held its breath. Then Wolfe continued, voice low and tight. This manuscript describes internal politics of Aurora with accuracy Knepp alone did not possess. It contains phrases Leona Hale often used in her editing notes. Meaning, I prompted. It implies an editor's presence, Wolfe said. Someone who handled drafts, someone with access to the editing room, someone with motive to hide the chapter revealing the killer. Aurora Insider, Saul concluded. Yes, Wolfe said, not Knepp, not an outside party, a member. I let out a breath. Terrific. A murderer with editorial privileges. Wolfe glared at me. Archie, this is not humorous. It's either humour or panic, I said. I like humour better. He stared at the manuscript again, and something uncomfortable crept into his expression. Fury. Cold, controlled fury. The kind Wolfe reserved for culinary sabotage, orchid neglect and murder that struck too close to home. Before I could say anything, the phone rang. I picked up. Goodwin. Lon Cohen sounded breathless. Archie, have you seen today's evening edition? No. Why? You'd better. Then, with a theatrical groan, the Gazette ran a headline, Nero Wolfe magnet for murder. Someone upstairs thought it'd sell papers. I swore. Lon, come on. Not me. I tried to stop it, but City Desk loves a scandal. Wolfe's going to take this personally. Lon sighed. Yeah, that's why I called. Prepare yourself. I hung up and cleared my throat. Bad news from the Gazette. Wolfe lifted his head. Explain. I did. Wolfe's eyes turned into two shards of black ice. Imbeciles, he muttered. Jackals. That headline is actionable. Yeah, I said, but suing newspapers means you'd have to leave the house, and I doubt the judge will accept a substitution of venue to Fritz's dining room. He glared. Archie. I'm just saying, if you start suing newspapers, Lon's going to need a new classified section labelled Ruins. Saul choked on a laugh. Wolfe gave me a look that could have melted brass, but he didn't ring the bell cord, so I took it as affection. He refocused on the manuscript. We require the missing chapter. Where do we get it? I asked. That, Wolfe said, is what we must deduce. Someone who edited Knepp's work had the opportunity. Geraldine Rusk, Leona Hale, now dead, possibly Bryce, possibly Verena. Kramer chose that precise moment to storm, not burst storm through the door. Wolfe, he barked, tossing his hat on the couch. I talked to the ME. Knepp's throat was crushed manually. That elevator scene was staged. We know, I said. Kramer glared. "Don't get ahead of me." Wolfe spoke, voice mild and terrible. "Inspector, Knepp's murder is part of a sequence." Kramer blinked. "You think the same person killed Hale and Knepp?" "Yes," he grunted. "Hell." Wolfe tapped the manuscript. "Inspector, the killer has been following this." Kramer leaned over it, squinting. "This some kind of novel?" "A script," Wolfe corrected. "For murder." Kramer's face paled under the cigar smoke. "You're telling me someone wrote out a kill list?" "In essence." "Well, that's just swell." He let out a long breath. "You got a suspect?" "Yes," Wolfe said. "But the evidence is incomplete. I require the missing chapter." Kramer studied Wolfe's expression, then nodded once. "All right, I'll trust your instincts. For now." That was Kramer-level affection. He grabbed his hat and left without slamming the door. Wolfe closed the manuscript with finality. "Archie?" "Yes?" "You will gather details on every person with access to Aurora's editing room." "With pleasure." "And Archie." He paused. I paused too. "Use caution. The killer may accelerate." I grinned. "Don't worry. If they come for me, I'll demand proper punctuation." Wolfe groaned. A deep, operatic groan. Fritz appeared in the doorway just then. "Dinner is ready, sir." Wolfe stood, towering and furious. And with that ritual closure, the hunt deepened, and so did the danger. If there's a sport more dangerous than professional boxing, it's walking into a room full of writers and telling them you need the truth. By 10 the next morning, I'd fortified myself with coffee and 3 deep breaths, recommended by doctors for stress, or so I've been told, and headed back into Aurora's tangled literary jungle. Wolfe had issued the directive with all the ceremony of a Roman emperor sending a gladiator into the arena. "Archie, you will extract information with tact." Tact in Wolfe's lexicon means try not to punch anyone and avoid setting fires. I can usually manage one of those. My first stop was Miles Turn's apartment, a swanky midtown duplex with more mirrors than a Broadway dressing room. The door opened after a long pause, revealing Turn in a silk robe, hair perfectly arranged for maximum brooding effect. "Goodwin," he said, sounding like he'd been expecting me and dreading it equally. "If you're looking for another interrogation, make an appointment." "Sure," I said, stepping past him anyway. "My secretary will pencil you in for never." He bristled. I ignored it. "Let's talk film rights," I said. "You and Geraldine Rusk were having a spirited exchange about Knepp's manuscript." Turn's expression flickered. "That woman is impossible. She wanted full control." "And you wanted?" "Recognition," he snapped. "My name attached to the adaptation. Knepp owed me that much." "Why? Because you think he cribbed your ideas?" "He did crib them, damn it. But I didn't kill him or Leona. I only kill in print." "Your prose has been accused of it," I said. He glared. I departed before he found something heavy to throw. Next up, Geraldine Rusk at her publishing office where manuscripts formed small skyscrapers on her desk. She looked up as I entered, tight-lipped and tense. "If this is about film rights," she said, "Turn is lying." "Probably, but I like hearing it from the source." She rubbed her temples. Knepp's manuscript had enormous potential. If handled well, it could have been the next major literary adaptation. But Turn wanted artistic credit. I wanted editorial control. "So you fought?" "Of course we fought. Writers and publishers fight like wolves over scraps." "Not that Wolfe," I said. "He stays seated." She managed a thin smile. "The point is, yes, we disagreed, but that doesn't make me a murderer." "Let's leave that to the evidence," I said. "Meanwhile, your financial interest in Knepp's work is noted." Her eyes flashed with irritation, but she didn't argue. Irritation is practically affection in the publishing world. At noon, I met Verena Lake in a tiny cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and despair. She wore a velvet coat and a look of frazzled innocence. "Archie," she sighed, stirring her coffee, "I admit I forged some of Knepp's cipher notes." "Just for fun?" "No. Well, partially. Knepp said mysterious notes helped him think, so I gave him a few. It was supposed to inspire him, not incriminate me." I leaned in. "Did you forge the real murder notes?" Her eyes widened. "Absolutely not. Mine used metaphors about moonlight and sea waves, not murder." "As alibis go," I said. "Poetic but useless." She looked wounded enough to write 3 sad sonnets about my cruelty. I paid the bill. Alden Bryce required a change of scenery because the man had the emotional stability of a bull terrier in a room full of balloons. I found him pacing the Aurora lounge, recounting his own accomplishments loudly enough that passers-by could take notes. "Bryce," I said, "I hear you staged some disputes lately." He smirked. "Publicity, Goodwin. It sells tickets. The press loves a good feud." "So you pretended to fight with Knepp?" He didn't mind. He needed attention. "But murder?" He scoffed. "I prefer my tragedies on the stage." "Then someone else is writing this drama," I said. He nodded grimly. "And they're doing a poor job." I left him rehearsing angry gestures. By 2 o'clock I'd collected enough half-truths to wallpaper the Chrysler Building, but not enough to solve a murder. I headed back to the brownstone where Wolfe was knee-deep in ciphers, literally, since every available surface was covered in note cards with symbols, numerals, and coded phrases. He glanced up as I entered. "Archie, report." I gave him the rundown. Wolfe listened silently, fingers steepled, eyes half-closed in that dangerous way that means his brain is running hot enough to boil water. When I finished, he tapped a finger on a card. "Your red herring is Verena Lake's forged notes." "Which I suspected," I said. "Her metaphors were criminal, but not that kind." He ignored me and picked up a different card. "Observe the pattern. Each cipher corresponds to a chapter motif in the manuscript. Each murder mirrors the theme." "Expulsion," I said. "Threats, poison, Knepp's staged death." "And next," Wolfe murmured, "the giant." I didn't like the way he said that. "Wolfe, no killer is turning you into a book ending." "That," he said, "is not your decision." Before I could argue, the doorbell rang. Fritz did not answer it. He merely appeared in the doorway and announced, "Inspector Kramer." Kramer strode in with the heaviness of a man who had lost sleep and cigarettes in equal measure. His face was carved into a scowl, but his eyes were alert. "Wolfe," he said, flipping open his notebook, "I need your take on the cipher pattern." "You have it," Wolfe replied calmly. A single hand authored all the messages. All the notes share linguistic quirks, a tendency to overuse assonance, for example, and a predilection for archaic verbs. Kramer blinked. "English, please." "A single author, a single killer." Kramer nodded slowly. "Figures, because none of the suspects alibi out cleanly." Wolfe leaned back, expression grave. "Inspector, the killer will strike again tonight unless we reconstruct the missing chapter. They are following a structure, a design." Kramer rubbed his brow. "Hell, I knew it." "Surprised? No. Impressed? Maybe." His voice softened a notch. "All right, Wolfe, I'll pull extra patrols on 35th Street. But hurry up, the press is hammering me for answers." Wolfe inclined his head. "Your cooperation is appreciated." Kramer blinked again. Wolfe rarely thanked anyone. He closed his notebook without a snap. "I'll wait for your next report." "Good day, Inspector," Wolfe said. Kramer left with the dignity of a man who's decided not to yell for once. I shut the door. Wolfe stared at me. "Archie, has the typewriter ribbon been secured?" "Yes," I said. "Certified evidence, but we can access it with proper logging." "Retrieve it." So 30 minutes later, I was at the precinct, filling out paperwork so dense it could have been mistaken for a novel. Stebbins supervised, wearing his bulldog expression. He watched every move I made, like I might eat the ribbon. "Relax, Pearlie," I said. "I'm not going to floss with it." He grunted. "Just don't screw up the chain of custody." I didn't. I'm a professional. Mostly. The ribbon was in a sealed evidence pouch. Black, worn, faintly oily. When I returned to the brownstone, Wolfe had the portable enlargement lamp ready. "Proceed," he commanded. I set the ribbon under the lamp. Wolfe adjusted the magnifier with surgeon-like precision, then leaned in. I hovered beside him, resisting the urge to drum fingers. He inhaled sharply. "What?" I asked. Wolfe pointed. "Impressions." Sure enough, faint indentations, ghost letters stamped into the ribbon. I leaned closer. "The title," Wolfe said, "of the missing chapter." I read it aloud. "The Last Giant." We spent the next 2 hours rebuilding the missing chapter from the ribbon impressions and Wolfe's manuscript analysis. Wolfe's jaw set. "That's you," I said quietly. He didn't respond. I exhaled. "Well, subtle killer we've got here." "No," Wolfe said, "not subtle. Obsessive. He rolled back from the desk. Archie, this must be communicated to Inspector Kramer at once, and Saul must shadow every Aurora member. The killer intends a finale. Tonight? I asked. Tonight, Wolfe confirmed. I picked up the phone but paused. Wolfe, you okay? He glared. I am not a fragile ornament. I know, but murderers with literary ambition might disagree. A long, heavy silence filled the room. Then Wolfe said, quietly but firmly, I place my reliance on you, Archie. That was Wolfe for don't get killed while protecting me, and it landed like a weight on my chest. I dialed Kramer. Inspector, brace yourself. The missing chapter title is The Last Giant, and unless you've shrunk lately, we both know who that means. Kramer swore so loudly I had to hold the phone away. We're on it, he growled. I hung up and grabbed my coat. Wolfe eyed me. Where are you going? To stop someone from turning your biography into a murder mystery. Wolfe closed his eyes. Pfui, be swift. And that, in Wolfe's world, is a benediction. I headed toward the door. Fritz peeked in, concerned. Is everything all right, Mr. Archie? Just another night at the office, I said. Then I stepped into the street, chasing a killer who had decided to turn life into literature and Wolfe into the final chapter. If there's a phrase guaranteed to ruin a detective's afternoon, it's assemble them all. When Wolfe said those words at 5:03 p.m., he said them with the solemnity of a king declaring war. I was standing with my notebook ready, blissfully unaware of how many phone calls I'd be making and how many writers would require coaxing, bribing, threatening, or in one case, interpreting through their agent. Archie, Wolfe said, summon the entire Aurora Circle, here, tonight. Sure, I replied. Should I also gather the 4 horsemen while I'm at it? It would be easier. He scowled. Do not be facetious. I'm never anything else, I said, but I started dialing. Getting 5 Aurora members to RSVP simultaneously was harder than gathering alley cats with commitment issues. Turn initially refused until I mentioned Wolfe might reveal something about film rights. Verena said she would come if the lighting wasn't too harsh. Hackett demanded assurance Wolfe wouldn't accuse him of murder again. Bryce wanted to know if refreshments would be provided. Geraldine simply said, I'll be there, in a tone that suggested the alternative was arson. By 7:45, the brownstone was as lively as a literary battlefield. Fritz's coffee service sat on the side table like a peace offering in a war no one had agreed to stop fighting. The suspects filtered in one by one, each carrying more anxiety than luggage. Miles Tern strutted in first, adjusting his tie as if he were preparing for a Broadway curtain call. Goodwin, he said, this better be important. I left a meeting with my screenwriter. Condolences to your screenwriter, I said. Next came Verena Lake, looking like a wilted orchid wrapped in velvet. Archie, she whispered, is Wolfe going to accuse us again? I hope so, I said. It keeps the evening lively. Clive Hackett entered with all the warmth of a frosted window pane. Let's get this over with, he snapped. I have a review to write. Good, I said. I was worried your venom glands were drying out. Geraldine Rusk arrived with her usual tight-lipped dignity, and finally Alden Bryce burst in, cape flapping dramatically though the air was perfectly still. By 8:02, Wolfe was in his chair, monumental and immovable, fingers laced on his stomach, yellow silk handkerchief neatly folded at his elbow. The room pulsed with tension. The writers shifted in their seats like schoolchildren expecting punishment. Kramer and Stebbins lurked in opposite corners, both pretending they weren't lurking. It was a miracle Wolfe tolerated them inside his office at all, but cooperation had become the theme of the week. Wolfe cleared his throat. Silence fell in a sharp line. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, voice heavy and formal, I have requested your presence this evening for a matter of considerable import. I knew better than to interrupt, but Bryce didn't. If this is about Knepp's estate, Bryce said, I intend to contest. It is not about property, Wolfe thundered, eyes flashing. It concerns murder. That shut them up. He continued. You are here because one among you has endeavoured to weave reality into a grotesque authorial fantasy, a manuscript of death. Tern snorted. Melodramatic. Pfui, Wolfe said, which in Wolfe-speak means, your opinion bores me. You will listen. Fritz entered quietly with a tray of coffee. His expression was steady, but he placed the cups with extra care, as if worried they might explode. The suspects eyed the tray like it was a firing squad. I stepped forward with a sheaf of papers. "Before anyone faints," I said, "let me clarify. This isn't poison, it's paper." Bryce looked disappointed. "Oh," Wolfe gestured. "Archie." I began distributing copies of what looked like a chapter draft. Typed, neat, crisp edges, but its content was anything but comforting. "This," I announced, "is the reconstructed missing chapter of The Great Devourer." The room froze. Even Kramer stiffened. Geraldine Rusk let out a strangled gasp and clutched the side of her chair. Her face drained of colour, and she sagged forward. "Turn!" I barked. "Help her!" Turn leapt up, faster than I'd thought he was capable of, and together we eased Geraldine upright. Her breathing was shallow but steady. "No poison," I said. "Just panic." She glared weakly. "You should give warnings." "Where's the drama in that?" She closed her eyes in despair. Wolfe resumed. "The chapter title," he said, "is The Last Giant." Hackett scoffed. "Meaning what? Some metaphor?" "No," Wolfe said. "A target." All eyes drifted toward Wolfe. His bulk, his authority, the nickname no one used aloud. The Giant. Verena let out a soft cry. "Mr. Wolfe, someone truly means to kill you." "Apparently," he said. Kramer stepped forward. "If you know something, Wolfe, say it now." Wolfe raised a hand. "In due course, Inspector. Allow me to finish." Kramer growled, but retreated a step. No stomping, no yelling, just pure frustration wrapped in reluctant respect. I passed out the last page. "This reconstruction," I told them, "was verified through Knepp's typewriter ribbon. Every impression lines up. The killer wrote the ending. They planned every murder as a chapter." Geraldine whispered, "My God." Wolfe inclined his head. "Indeed, murder as authorship. A narrative dictated by ego, resentment, and delusion." Bryce sprang up. "Well, it wasn't me." "Sit," Wolfe commanded. Bryce sat. Wolfe continued, "You will each remain until Inspector Kramer completes his inquiries. I will make my accusation when properly prepared." "Prepared?" Turn snapped. "Wolfe, if you know who the killer is, I shall reveal it," Wolfe boomed, "when I choose." The silence that followed had texture. Thick, uncomfortable, electric. I scanned the room. Verena looked ready to faint again. Turn was sweating in his collar. Hackett's eyes gleamed with malicious curiosity. Bryce fidgeted like he wanted to leap into a monologue. Geraldine sat rigid, clutching the chapter copy like a talisman. Kramer stepped toward Wolfe. "You better not be bluffing." "Inspector," Wolfe said, voice softening by a fraction, "if I were bluffing, you would know." That was Wolfe-level reassurance. Kramer grunted acknowledgement. Stebbins tapped his notebook with a pencil. "So, this chapter, this new one, it names somebody?" "It implies somebody," Wolfe corrected. "The killer erased their own name. They fancy themselves subtle." Bryce muttered, "Clearly not a playwright." Wolfe ignored him. I stood beside Wolfe's desk, ready in case he wanted the bell cord pulled or a suspect tackled. Instead, he nodded toward the coffee tray. "Archie, serve them." "Why me?" I asked. "Because," he said, "your presence disturbs them." "Flattery," I said, "will get you somewhere." But I obeyed. As I poured coffee, the suspects flinched like I was doling out hemlock. Hackett sniffed his cup suspiciously. Turn refused sugar. "Too symbolic," he said. Verena asked for extra cream because she was faint with worry. Bryce drank straight as if hoping it was poison. Geraldine accepted hers with trembling fingers. Once everyone was properly unnerved, Wolfe leaned forward. "You are here," he said, "because murder has been orchestrated as literature. The perpetrator is an author of sorts, composing death as narrative climax." Turn scoffed again. "Ridiculous." "Is it?" Wolfe asked. His eyes pinned Turn like a knife. "You all jockey for credit, for recognition, for authority over words. Someone among you took that compulsion to its grotesque end." Verena whispered, "But why Wolfe? Why is he the final chapter?" Wolfe lifted an eyebrow. "Because I intruded. Because my intellect threatens the killer's sense of authorial control." Hackett muttered, "You do have a habit of editing people." Kramer had enough. "Wolfe, you said you'd reveal the killer eventually. When? Wolfe inhaled. When I have all the pieces aligned. We have the recreated chapter, Bryce shouted. Isn't that enough? No, Wolfe said. Missing punctuation remains. I grinned. That's what you get when killers moonlight as writers. Hackett scowled. Goodwin, be serious. I am, on alternate Thursdays. Wolfe held up a hand. The room stilled. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, you will remain in Manhattan tonight. You will answer to Inspector Kramer. You will make yourselves available at my instruction. Tern opened his mouth to protest. Wolfe boomed, Be silent. Even the radiator went quiet. Wolfe's gaze swept the room. The killer sought to dictate the end, but I will write the conclusion. He rang the bell cord once. Sharp, crisp. Fritz appeared instantly. Fritz, Wolfe said, clear the coffee. Yes, sir. The suspects stood, shaky but compliant, ready for Kramer to herd them into separate corners for post-summoning questioning. Before they dispersed, Wolfe added, Tomorrow morning at 11, return. I will present the denouement. Kramer gave Wolfe a long, evaluating look. All right, Wolfe, he said quietly. I'll wait for your report. He didn't slam the door. When they were gone, the brownstone breathed again. Wolfe leaned back, exhaled, and closed his eyes. I asked, feeling literary. He cracked one eye. Archie. Yes? Do not improvise. No promises, I said. He groaned, a deep, operatic groan. Suspense hung in the air like a bookmark waiting to fall. If you ever want to see a collection of literary egos reduced to trembling jelly, invite them to Nero Wolfe's office at 11 a.m. and tell them the truth is about to be revealed. I was standing by Wolfe's desk at 10:57, adjusting the lineup of chairs one final time. Wolfe claims he doesn't care about theatrics, but if those chairs weren't arranged with geometrical perfection, he'd complain about visual disorder until I fixed them. At 11 sharp, the suspects filed in. Miles Tern with a smirk plastered on like stage makeup. Verena Lake pale and ghostly under her velvet. Clive Hackett scowling like someone had forced him to read an optimistic poem. Geraldine Rusk, stiff as a lamppost. And Alden Bryce humming with nervous theatrical energy, as if awaiting his cue. Kramer and Stebbins slipped in behind them, quiet but alert. It was the exact setup Wolfe loved. An audience, an antagonist, and a mountain of logic waiting to avalanche onto someone's head. Wolfe was already in position, occupying his oversized chair like royalty on a throne, hands resting on the arc of his stomach. His eyes were half-lidded, deceptively placid. When Nero Wolfe looks sleepy, it means he's ready to breathe fire. Ladies and gentlemen, he began. His voice was velvet over steel. You are here because the farce has exhausted itself. Murder is no art. It is a brutish imposition, and I dislike brutishness. No one dared cough. I took my usual place beside the desk, notebook open. Though Wolfe didn't need my handwriting, he needed my presence. He always does, even when he pretends otherwise. He continued. This entire sequence of crimes has been presented as narrative, a story, a manuscript, a grotesque attempt to impose literary structure upon human lives. Bryce raised a hand. If this is a commentary on my play, it is not, Wolfe snapped. Sit. Bryce sat hard. Wolfe's gaze drifted to the manuscript pages I had placed in front of him earlier. The killer relied on artifice, on deceit, on an outline constructed as meticulously as any of you craft your novels, poems, or plays. Hackett grunted. So you said yesterday. And now, Wolfe said, I shall say who. A collective inhale. Even Kramer stiffened. I glanced at Tern. His fingers twitched on the arm of his chair. A tick worth noting. Wolfe folded his hands. Let us begin with the first mistake, assuming the manuscript The Great Devourer originated with Dorian Knepp. Verena gasped. It didn't? No, Wolfe said. Knepp lacked the stylistic discipline, the manuscript's rhythms, its restructuring tendencies, and its reliance on symbolic motifs belonged to another hand, someone whose prose is overwrought, self-congratulatory, and obsessed with grandeur. Hackett's eyebrows shot up. My God, Tern scoffed. This is absurd. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. You should allow me to finish before you embarrass yourself further. I couldn't resist. Too late. Tern glared at me. If looks could kill, Wolfe wouldn't need to solve a case. Wolfe continued in that slow, inexorable tone that crushes lies as easily as he crushes beer foam. Turn, your ghostwriting history with Knepp is well documented, though not public knowledge. Years ago, Knepp hired you to shape his earliest drafts. In truth, you wrote them for him. Geraldine Rusk whispered. My God, that explains everything. Indeed, Wolfe said, you resented Knepp for eclipsing you. You considered yourself the true author, yet he achieved the renown, the reviews, the attention you craved. Turn opened his mouth again, but Wolfe simply raised a hand. Silence. The word dropped like an iron weight. Wolfe leaned forward an inch. For him, that's lunging. Knepp expelled you from the Aurora Circle after exposing your ghostwriting. You were humiliated. The group took his side. Your vanity could not endure such affront. Hackett chuckled darkly. Makes sense. He always did have the temper of a thwarted diva. Wolfe ignored him. You retaliated by composing a narrative of vengeance, a manuscript in which expulsion leads to destruction, each chapter corresponding to a murder. He ticked off fingers. Leona Hale, poisoned when she uncovered your plagiarism. Knepp, murdered to complete your story arc. Geraldine Rusk clapped a hand over her mouth. So the manuscript wasn't prophecy, but it was a plan. Correct, Wolfe said. A blueprint. Bryce sputtered. But what about the ciphers? Turn wrote them, Wolfe said. He forged Knepp's eccentric style, not difficult for a man who once authored Knepp's voice entirely. He relied on archaic verbs and florid metaphor, common in his own writing. Hackett laughed outright. Same pretentious tone. Should have caught that. Turn's face tightened. This is slander. No, Wolfe replied. This is deduction. Kramer stepped closer, jaw firm. Hold, Wolfe said, lifting a palm. I have one final point. He pointed to me. This was planned. I stepped forward and placed the reconstructed chapter, the one pulled from Knepp's typewriter ribbon, on the desk. The missing chapter, Wolfe said, was titled The Last Giant, an unsubtle reference. Hackett blinked. You're the giant. Wolfe inclined his head, expression cool. It is a sobriquet certain attackers use. The killer intended me as the final murder, a symbol of judgment, of intellect-devouring deceit, a perverse theme. Verena Lake whimpered. So he wanted to kill you last. Yes, Wolfe said. He wished to complete the literary metaphor, Knepp's execution of talent, Leona's execution of truth, and at last the execution of critical reason. I said, so basically, somebody thought they were writing the great American murder novel. Wolfe didn't even reprimand me. That's how serious it had become. Turn shot up from his seat. This is ridiculous. You have no proof. Nothing tying me to... Phooey, Wolfe thundered. Your fingerprints were found on Knepp's safe deposit box. Your handwriting impressions were detected on the ribbon. Your quarrels with Leona were witnessed. You staged the elevator scene with the clumsiness of a man who never built tension without adjectives. Bryce nearly applauded. Turn trembled, sweat dotted his forehead. You can't. Wolfe cut him off with the final merciless blow. And Mr. Turn, you made the gravest mistake of all. You assumed editors do not remember earlier drafts, Miss. Rusk observed a phrase in the manuscript that Knepp hated, and that you insisted on inserting in every ghost-written revision. Only you. Geraldine nodded, pale. It's true. He used that awful phrase, the mind's cathedral. Knepp despised it. It appears 5 times in the manuscript, Wolfe said. 5 times. Turn's knees buckled. He sagged back into the chair. This is... finished, Wolfe declared. Kramer seized the moment. Miles Turn, you are under arrest for the murders of Leona Hale and Dorian Knepp. Stebbins moved like a charging bull producing cuffs. Turn tried to resist, half-heartedly, like a man acting out the final scene of a tragedy he wrote himself. But Stebbins had experience with stubborn playwrights and worse. In seconds, Turn was restrained. As Stebbins led him toward the door, Turn twisted for one last dramatic line. I did what the world refused to do, recognize true genius. Hackett muttered. Well, you certainly killed taste. Kramer guided Turn forward. Enough. Save it for the DA. The door slammed behind them. Silence swelled. Heavy. Satisfying. Wolfe exhaled, long and deep. Archie. Yes, sir? Beer. I couldn't help a grin. already chilled, in the glass, as the prophecy foretold. He shook his head, but his eyes softened, the closest Wolfe gets to showing affection outside orchid hours. As I poured his beer, he leaned back in his chair, victorious and monumental. Archie Goodwin's rule of thumb: when Nero Wolfe solves a case and drinks his beer in peace, the world, at least for a moment, makes perfect sense. And somewhere downtown, Miles Turn's masterpiece had just found its final editor. If there's one thing I've learned from working for Nero Wolfe, it's that murder never ends when the handcuffs click. There's always the cleanup, police, paperwork, press, and the peculiar brand of emotional fallout that hits writers when a fellow scribe turns killer. By the time Kramer hauled Miles Turn out, the brownstone air still crackled like a stage after a thunderous final act. I stood by the office door, letting the tension drain out inch by inch, like unscrewing a stubborn valve. Kramer didn't leave right away. Instead, he hovered near Wolfe's desk with a cigar clamped between two fingers and a frown that wasn't quite a frown. For once, he wasn't barking. He wasn't threatening subpoenas or stomping like a rhinoceros with a badge. He just stood there, tapping ash neatly into Wolfe's tray and staring at the rug like the pattern personally offended him. Wolfe watched him with his usual stillness, hands steepled over his mound of dignity. Fritz had slipped in earlier to clear the coffee cups, performing the silent retreat of a seasoned battlefield medic. Stebbins had followed Turn and left Kramer with the delicate part, swallowing his pride without choking on it. Finally, Kramer said, "You saved lives, Wolfe." Wolfe blinked, slowly. Kramer added, "Don't make a habit of it." I almost applauded. Wolfe didn't smile, he rarely gives away the store, but he dipped his head half an inch. For him, that was a bow, handshake, and embrace all rolled together. Kramer straightened, crushed out the cigar, and fixed me with a stare. "Good work, Goodwin. Don't let it go to your head." "It already has," I said. "I store spare ego in the safe." He snorted, turned on his heel, and left without slamming the door, which was as close to affection as the inspector ever comes. When the latch clicked, Wolfe released a low breath, the kind you let out when the storm clouds finally decide to rain somewhere else. "Archie." "Yes, sir?" "Dinner." It was 8 o'clock sharp. Fritz, punctual as the tides, appeared at the doorway wearing that calm expression he saves for nights when the brownstone has flirted too closely with catastrophe. In his hands was a tray bearing pheasant, roasted to an aroma that could resurrect the dead, with mushrooms, buttered carrots, and a sauce that reflected Fritz's most cherished culinary philosophy: feed the soul before the stomach knows what hit it. We relocated to the dining room. Wolfe settled into his place at the head of the table, shoulders dropping in relief as Fritz plated the pheasant with reverence. When Fritz cooks game, even the air starts to hum like an overture. As Fritz served him, Wolfe performed a rare act. He glanced at me, not casually, not because he wanted to complain about how I carved something last week, but with the careful once-over of a man confirming his right-hand scout had returned from a battle intact. It lasted only a second, but it was there. I grinned. "I'm not poisoned, shot, stabbed, clubbed, or ghost-written, if that's what you're checking." Wolfe scowled. "Archie, must you?" "Yes." He harumphed, which for Wolfe is shorthand for, "I am relieved but refuse to display it." Fritz cleared his throat gently. "Enjoy," he said, then vanished back into the kitchen like a dignified phantom. We ate in a comfortable silence, the kind only possible after a case as wrapped with the killer caught, the evidence secured, and Wolfe's logic reigning supreme. The pheasant was magnificent. Fritz could make a Thanksgiving turkey weep with jealousy. Wolfe savoured each bite, pausing only to sip his beer. He was content, which means his eyebrows weren't twitching. Halfway through the meal, he set his fork down. "Archie?" "Still here?" "Your conduct these past 2 days was tolerable." "I'll have Fritz engrave that on a plaque." "Do not," he said sharply. But the corner of his mouth twitched, and I took that as the victory it was. When dinner ended, plates scraped, napkins folded, and Wolfe's monumental appetite satisfied, we returned to the office. It was 8:50, a sliver of time before Wolfe's post-prandial reading period. I opened the windows an inch to let in the cool Manhattan breeze. Outside, the city purred and muttered, unaware that the Aurora Circle's literary volcano had erupted and been sealed shut inside our walls. Wolfe lowered himself into his chair with the slow caution of a man returning to his throne. "You may begin the report, Archie." I crossed to my typewriter. The keys gleamed in the lamplight, ready to clatter the night away. The machine and I have a long-standing relationship. It bruises my fingers, and I retaliate by producing prose Wolfe pretends not to admire. "Before you begin," Wolfe said suddenly, "what is the state of the Aurora Circle?" "Collapsed," I said. "Geraldine Rusk resigned before she even reached the street. Hackett told 4 reporters he's writing a scathing column about the death of artistic integrity. Verena Lake is leaving town for a spiritual recuperation retreat, which probably means her aunt's summer cabin. And Alden Bryce announced he's turning the whole ordeal into a play." Wolfe's eyelids fluttered. "Good God." "I agree. If he casts a man with your physique to play the giant devourer, I expect royalties." "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Do shut up." I smirked and sat at the typewriter. "And the manuscript?" "Seized," Wolfe said. "Inspector Kramer will see to its forensic preservation." "And the press?" Wolfe grimaced like someone had served him warm beer. "Mr. Cohen informed me the Gazette will publish a reluctant commendation, something to the effect of 'Wolfe intervenes in literary murders again.'" "Look on the bright side," I said. "At least they're not calling you a menace this time." He glared at me. "They imply I attract violence." "You do attract interesting clientele." "That is different." I started typing. The rhythmic clacking filled the room, a counterpoint to the low rumble of Wolfe's evening satisfaction. He leaned back, eyes closed, cultivating the appearance of indifference while secretly enjoying the sound of a case later becoming immortalized in ink. After a few minutes, he said, "Saul Panzer will receive his bonus tomorrow. He'll appreciate that. And he earned it. If he hadn't retrieved that manuscript, we'd still be fishing in the dark." "Indeed." Wolfe opened his eyes. "And your perseverance was instrumental." I froze. "Careful. If you keep that up, I'll start thinking you like me." "I tolerate you," he said firmly. "That is sufficient. You adore me." "I do not." "You do." "Archie." "Fine, fine." He exhaled through his nose, but I caught a glimmer in his eyes, pride smothered under layers of bluster. The clock chimed 9. Upstairs, the orchids waited, soaking in their nocturnal serenity. Wolfe didn't rise yet. The case had left a trace of weight on him, intellectual exertion, emotional frustration, perhaps even the faint tremor of what could have been if the murderer had succeeded. "You know," I said, softening the tone, "you were the target." "Yes." His voice went flat. "It was intolerable. But you handled it." "I always do." "And you survived another writer." Wolfe's eyes flicked toward me. What a relief. "A miracle, really. Considering Manhattan's literary scene, surviving one ambitious author is equivalent to crossing a minefield while blindfolded." "That analogy is overwrought." "Blame Miles' turn. He started it." Wolfe grunted. "Enough." He pushed his chair back abruptly. "I am retiring to the orchids. Your report will be completed tonight." "Yes, sir." He walked, not quickly but with purpose, to the elevator, pressing the button with the dignity of a man commanding a procession. The doors slid open. He disappeared into his sanctuary of tropical blossoms, where no manuscript conspiracies could disturb him. Left alone in the office, I resumed typing. The keys rattled out the final details. Motives unraveled, murders solved, egos punctured, justice restored. The brownstone felt calmer than it had in days. Outside, the city buzzed with distant taxi horns and street lamps casting gold halos on the pavement. The case of the great devourer was closed. The giant had survived, and as I typed the last line, I decided Wolfe deserved that second helping of pheasant after all.